She was found beneath a drowned chapel, silent and watching. Now Lena hears whispers in her sleep, and Ira's shadow moves when she doesn't. Something woke up with her. And it remembers who listened first. It hadn't rained in Dry Hollow for 72 days. The grass yellowed. The wells grew shallow. And the lake that fed the valley, Blackmere, shrank each morning as if it were breathing out something it had been holding for too long. On the 73rd day, the spire broke the surface. It came slowly at first, a pointed structure of slick stone and rusted iron, crusted with years of sediment. Locals assumed it was debris, perhaps an old pier or a forgotten irrigation shaft. But as the waters dropped, the truth emerged, an entire chapel swallowed by the reservoir, stone walls partially intact, its roof buckled inward like a mouth held open in a final gasp. No one remembered it being there. That morning, Sheriff Nolan Clark received 2 calls. The first, from a fisherman who swore he heard bells coming from beneath the lake. The second, from a boy who claimed a pale girl was standing in the ruins, watching the sky without blinking. The calls came in 20 minutes apart. Clark dismissed the first as nonsense and the second as a prank. But something itched at him. He drove out to Blackmere with Deputy Ruiz before noon. What they found wasn't a prank. The girl was small, no older than 10. Her skin was slick with silt and bloodless, her eyes wide and dry. She stood barefoot on the warped stone floor of the chapel, surrounded by water and mud. Her clothes were gray, tattered, old-fashioned. She didn't move when they approached. Didn't speak. Just watched the sky, her mouth slightly open. She was cold to the touch but alive. They carried her out. She didn't resist. They called her Ira. At first, no one knew what else to do. She had no ID, no records, no missing persons report that matched. Sheriff Clark brought her to the regional clinic. A nurse took her vitals. Her pulse was faint but steady, her pupils unresponsive to light. She hadn't spoken a word. Not to the sheriff. Not to the doctors. Not to the nurse who held her hand during the scan. Dr. Lena Holt received the call that same night. A specialist in trauma-related mutism and nonverbal children, Lena had seen her share of unsettling cases. But something in the sheriff's voice made her pause. She doesn't blink, he said. She hasn't eaten. No signs of abuse or injury, but, she's wrong, document. There's something about her. Lena had been between cases. She packed a weekend bag and drove overnight. The first time Lena saw Ira, she felt watched. Not by the girl. But by the silence around her. The child sat curled on a hospital bed, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes tracked movement but slowly, as if processing vision in reverse. The lights above flickered intermittently, faulty ballast, they said. Lena asked for the room to be cleared. She sat across from her and simply observed. Ira didn't react. Her breathing was shallow, rhythmically paced. Her body language didn't suggest fear or shock. Instead, she seemed to be, waiting. Lena leaned forward. "My name is Lena," she said gently. "You're safe here. You don't have to speak. Just listen." Ira blinked once. It was the only time. By the 3rd day, Lena noticed the patterns. Ira tapped her fingers against her leg. Not random. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps again. When Lena responded by gently tapping her pen, Ira turned to look at her, and smiled. Not like a child. Not warmly. It was mechanical, forced, as if replicating something memorized. Lena recorded every detail. During the nights, the nurses began reporting disturbances. Whispering, though the girl never spoke. Lights dimming inexplicably. One nurse claimed her badge magnetically demagnetized near Ira's bed. Another said she heard a lullaby, sung in reverse. On the 5th night, the hospital cameras glitched. Frame skipped. Audio warped. Ira was seen sitting up in bed, eyes closed, mouthing something silently. That same night, Lena had her first nightmare. The dream. She stood ankle-deep in black water. Around her, a chapel of crumbling stone. The walls breathed softly, in and out, like lungs. Candles floated in the air, unlit. In the far corner stood Ira, facing the wall, her back arched unnaturally. Her arms moved slowly, drawing circles with her fingers. When Lena called her name, the girl turned. But her face was gone. Only skin. Lena woke gasping, her throat dry and sore. On her nightstand, her phone had recorded static. In town, things changed. Dry Hollow wasn't large, maybe 200 residents, scattered farms, and an old Catholic parish that hadn't held service since 1987. But as word of the girl spread, so did the unease. Dogs refused to go near the clinic. Birds gathered on the power lines and didn't move. Children began waking with nosebleeds. A boy in school drew spirals on every surface he could find. His teacher asked why. He said, "She showed me." When asked who, he only said, "The girl who listens." Lena reviewed the lake records. Blackmere Reservoir had been filled in 1962, part of a rural water project. The government documentation was vague, maps redacted, no mention of structures flooded beneath. But a librarian found an archived photo labeled Chapel of the Veiled Word, dated 1911. In the picture, the steeple matched the one now exposed. Below it, barely visible in the grainy image, stood a group of children in gray robes. Their mouths were sewn shut. Lena asked for access to the full archive. The librarian refused. Quietly, he said, "Some things in this town, we're not supposed to look back on." Ira began responding, to silence. When placed in a soundproof room, her vitals improved. Her breathing became calm. But when music played, even softly, she curled into herself and began tapping her arms. 3 taps. 3 more. When Lena entered during one of these episodes, Ira looked up and mouthed a word silently. Lena recorded the moment. She analyzed the footage later. Using a lip-reading specialist, the word was confirmed. Below. The priest came on the 7th day. Father Ellery, the last living caretaker of the parish before it closed. Nearly blind, voice like gravel. He insisted on seeing the girl. "The water's down because the seal's broken," he muttered. "She wasn't supposed to be found." Lena asked what he meant. He told her of a ritual, old and whispered, never written. Of the hushed ones, children chosen not to speak, but to carry something that cannot be said aloud. "They hear it," he said, tapping his ear. "Before they're born. Some say they're born hearing backward." When he approached Ira, she flinched. And whispered something in his direction. Just once. The priest fell to his knees. He began to sob, hands covering his face. "That voice," he gasped, "was my sister's. She drowned in 58. She wasn't even born when that church was buried." Later that night, Ira drew for the first time. A circle, layered within a square. Around it, 4 human figures, each with their mouths crossed out. One stood apart, taller, with black lines drawn from its ears. On the bottom corner, in childlike print, "He listens where we can't." The drawing wouldn't stop bleeding. Lena had taken the sketch, Ira's circle within a square, surrounded by voiceless figures, and scanned it for documentation. But when she returned to the original paper, the ink had bled through. The center of the circle pulsed slightly, as if moisture had been added. Yet the paper was dry. She touched it, and her fingertip tingled, faintly numb. That night, she wrapped the drawing in a folder and locked it away. The next morning, it was back on her desk. Ira began speaking in her sleep. The night staff kept a recorder in the observation room. At 2:03 a.m., she sat upright in bed, eyes closed, and whispered a string of sounds. Not words. More like syllables stretched and reversed, consonants mangled in a mouth too small to contain them. The audio team flagged it for analysis. Lena listened to the recording in her office. The waveform showed no anomalies, until reversed. Played backwards, the sounds aligned with Portuguese syntax. One phrase translated clearly, "He teaches without words." The rest remained unclear, fragments of sentences, repetitions of "below" and "again," and a single word repeated 9 times, "voiceling." Lena drove to the site where Ira had been found. The lake had swallowed the steeple again, but the water was lower than it should have been. There were no rains. No runoff. And yet, the lake refused to refill naturally. Locals began calling it the Hollow Mouth. At the water's edge, Lena found remnants of stone and wood. Half a pew, a rusted cross. But deeper, beyond the soft mud, something else protruded, a section of floorboard, darkened and smooth. She knelt beside it and brushed away dirt. There, carved by hand and stained deep into the wood, was the same circle in square symbol. But this time, surrounded by a spiral of tiny human teeth. She backed away slowly. At the clinic, Ira refused to eat. Her eyes stayed on the ceiling, unmoving, lips pressed tightly. When a nurse tried to coax her with soft food, she turned her head and whispered, "It's under the table." Nothing was found. But later, when Lena ran her hand along the underside of the metal tray cart, she felt grooves. Scratched into the steel, with fingernails or a sharp object, "He learns through me." A breakthrough came unexpectedly. Lena brought in a box of visual stimuli, photos, flashcards, symbolic objects, to try triggering recognition or memory. Ira responded to none of them. Not until Lena produced a mirror. It was a hand mirror, old and worn, found in the staff storage. As Lena raised it, Ira recoiled violently. Her chair scraped backward. Her hands covered her ears. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Lena slowly lowered the mirror, heart racing. Ira whispered, breathless, "That's how he looks in." Lena began dreaming again. The same water. The chapel breathing. This time, she stood inside a white room with no windows, only a single door, ajar, but sealed from the outside. Through the crack, she saw movement, like limbs folding over themselves in impossible directions. She heard a voice behind her. A child's voice. "He ate the word before it was born." She turned. Ira stood there, but her eyes were stitched shut. Lena woke screaming. She reviewed the clinic's historical records. The building had once been a boarding school, Hollowvale Institute, established in 1894. A side note in a forgotten logbook referenced a hidden sub-basement for language correction. No maps. No details. Just one warning scribbled beside the line. "Don't teach the voicelings." She had the janitor help her locate the old maintenance tunnel behind the boiler room. What they found wasn't listed on any blueprint. A spiral staircase, rusted and narrow, leading 20 feet underground. The air was cold. At the bottom, they found a hallway lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling, all facing inward. The floor was made of stone, marked with circular stains. A single doll sat at the end of the corridor, sewn from cloth and string, faceless. Lena reached for it. The instant her hand touched the fabric, the mirror behind her cracked. In the reflection, for just a second, Ira stood behind her. But when Lena turned, she was alone. Ira began drawing obsessively. Dozens of images. Circles within squares. Mouths sewn shut. People with elongated ears and shadows that stretched against gravity. One picture showed a tall figure bent backward at the neck, whispering into a baby's ear. The baby had no face. Only a hole. Lena brought the drawings to a linguist and symbologist. The response was immediate: "This isn't a language. It's a pre-language. Like cognitive fossils, meant not to communicate, but to transfer." "Transfer what?" The expert paused. "Something not human." A test revealed something stranger. Ira's hearing was unique, not enhanced, but reversed. Her brain processed sound backward. Echoes reached her before words. She responded best to reversed recordings of speech. When Lena played reversed phrases like, "I see you," Ira smiled and whispered, "I saw you first." She was hearing what had already been said, before it was spoken. Then came the incident with the nurse. During a quiet afternoon, Nurse Bailey entered to check vitals. Ira turned to her, pointed to the corner, and said, "Don't let it follow you." The nurse laughed nervously. "What's following me, sweetheart?" Ira pointed again. "The ear without skin." That evening, Bailey was found unconscious in the stairwell. She had bitten through her own tongue. Her chart read, "Self-harm under duress," but Lena knew better. On her medical gown, drawn in blood, a spiral. Ira's DNA results finally came in. Mitochondrial lineage was inconclusive. The blood sample contained irregular protein markers, some similar to what's found in fetal tissue before neural language development. As if her cognitive blueprint had never matured, or had been intentionally arrested. But that wasn't the strangest part. There were signs of prenatal scarring, as if the brain had been surgically altered in utero. Father Ellery returned to the clinic with a box. Inside were old journals, letters, and one photo, taken in 1923. It showed a group of women standing around a child, who sat in a circle carved into the floor. The caption read, "Second Listening Ritual." Subject, Mira Holt. Lena stared at the photo. The woman kneeling beside the child was her great-grandmother. She confronted Ellery. "What is this? Why my family?" The priest looked hollow. "Your blood remembers. Your dreams are not yours. She's speaking to you because she thinks you're one of them." "One of what?" He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Don't go back to the chapel." That night, the lights failed again. The observation room blacked out for 17 minutes. When power returned, Ira was no longer in bed. She was crouched in the corner, nails dug into the wall. Lena entered slowly. Ira whispered, "He's under the blood. You heard him once. In your mother's sleep." Then she reached out and placed her hand on Lena's stomach. Her palm was cold. And inside Lena's head, a voice whispered, "You listened before you could cry." There were no birds in Dry Hollow anymore. The skies remained overcast, but no storm came. Winds moved without sound, brushing through the trees without resistance. Somewhere beneath the clinic, the power lines buzzed inconsistently, always 3 pulses, then silence. 3 again. The same pattern Ira had tapped on the wall. The same rhythm Lena had begun to hear in her sleep. It wasn't tinnitus. It was breathing. After the incident in the observation room, Ira stopped moving. Her vitals were stable, but her posture remained frozen, curled in a fetal position, eyes open, unblinking, hands still faintly raised toward Lena as if holding on to the air. Lena hadn't told the others what the girl had said. Not about her mother's sleep. Not about the voice in her head. Not about the feeling that something had turned inward inside her. She no longer needed sleep. She just waited. The clinic's hallways felt longer now. Every corner creaked. Walls developed fine cracks overnight, long, thread-like fractures that curved unnaturally, forming tight spirals. The maintenance team painted over them. The next day, they were back. Some of the staff quit. Others stopped speaking unless spoken to. One night nurse placed cotton in her ears and refused to remove it, repeating, "She's in the vents. She hums when no one listens." They sedated her. She slept with her eyes open. Lena found the final file in her grandmother's attic. It was buried beneath religious books, old maps, and sealed letters. A journal marked H. Holt, 1935. Inside, handwritten notes about a project called Womb Echo, a government-sanctioned experiment during the war, seeking to reverse linguistic cognition in unborn children by stimulating the fetus with inverted phonetics and silence exposure. The goal, to create a child who would hear language before birth, without ever learning it, an original listener. It was deemed unethical. Shut down. But not before 4 births. Only 1 child survived beyond age 3. The name listed, Ira Holt. Lena drove to Blackmere that night. The lake had receded again. No one could explain why. The sky was still. The moon low. She walked to the edge where the chapel once stood. Water lapped gently against the ruins, but it sounded wrong. Off-tempo. Like footsteps faking rhythm. She stepped into the shallows. The earth beneath the water felt warm. Back at the clinic, Ira was missing. Security footage showed nothing but static from 3:03 to 3:19 a.m. When the feed returned, her bed was empty. The walls in her room were covered in patterns, hundreds of them, scratched by fingernails into the plaster. Spirals. Mouths. Circles. Squares. At the center, a human ear, elongated, carved in near-perfect anatomical detail. Underneath, the word, awakened. Lena returned to the old sub-basement beneath the clinic. She found new symbols etched into the stone, glowing faintly. They pulsed, dim, then bright, then dim again. Breathing. A rhythmic response, not unlike the EEG readout of a sleeping brain. Something had changed. The corridor of mirrors had fogged from the inside. Each reflection showed Ira, but not as she was. In each, she appeared older, taller, more aware. And in every one, her mouth was stitched shut with red thread. At the end of the hallway, the doll was gone. In its place stood a door. Wooden. Cracked. Slightly ajar. She opened it. Beyond was a small room. White walls. A single chair. A mirror. And in the corner, Ira. Still, silent. Lena stepped inside. Ira turned slowly. Her mouth was open, but the sound didn't come from her. It came from the walls. We never speak forward. Only back. Lena staggered. The voice sounded like hers, but reversed, echoed, aged. Like something she hadn't yet said, but would. Ira reached out and touched Lena's temple. Visions flooded her mind. She saw herself in the womb, hearing sounds from outside, not as language, but as intent. Emotion stripped of words. Rage. Fear. Hunger. Worship. Then came the absence, a womb filled with silence, thick and suffocating. Not quiet, but a kind of negative sound. Then, him. The one they called He Who Listens. A figure not shaped by flesh, but by attention. A mouth that required no lips. A will that seeped through thought itself. She saw others, children across centuries, born with the same mark. Each one silent. Each one drawing the same shapes. Each one heard before they were seen. And each one, opened. Ira withdrew her hand. Lena was on the floor, gasping, blood from her nose, ears ringing. "Why me?" she whispered. Ira finally blinked. "Because you remembered first." The town began to unravel. Reports of children whispering to walls. Babies speaking backwards. People sleepwalking into the woods. Symbols appeared overnight on churches, schools, water towers. In a nearby county, an entire kindergarten class drew the same spiral with no instruction. Every drawing was marked with one word. Return. Father Ellery was found dead in his home. His eyes had been removed. On the walls, pages torn from hymnals, rearranged in reverse order. At the center of the room, a circle of salt and teeth. A phonograph played continuously, backwards. The recording was of his final sermon. In reverse, it spoke one phrase over and over. The mouth was never to be opened. Lena brought Ira to the ruins of the chapel. Not out of obligation, but instinct. The foundation stones were warm beneath their feet. The ground trembled. Ira walked ahead, bare feet leaving no imprint. She stood at the center of the nave, where the altar once stood. And she knelt. Lena followed. The earth split. Silently. From below, a wind exhaled, not air, but soundless force. Lena felt it in her bones. In her mind. In her memories. As if someone had turned her thoughts inside out and filled the hollow with echo. Ira began to hum. Low. Slow. Backward. The chapel stones glowed faintly. From the crack in the ground, something rose. Not a creature. Not a man. But an absence shaped like both. The silhouette of presence. A suggestion of mouth. Of ears too many. It whispered into Ira's open eyes. The clinic collapsed the next day. The town was evacuated. The lake finally vanished. No one found Lena. No one found Ira. But children across the region began to hum in reverse during sleep. Spirals appeared beneath their beds. Teachers found notebooks with drawings signed only with a symbol, a circle inside a square. And in one small town library, a photo was discovered. A group of children in gray robes. Their mouths were sewn shut. But one girl stood apart. Eyes open. Mouth smiling.